So this next passage is about the clip where I am asking Albert to tell us more about the thing in Washington, when he played it for the first time in Washington, D.C. at the National Cathedral. And he says, it's on the program up on the program, yellowed in its frame, was up on the balcony overlooking the Rendezvous Lounge. And when finally, perhaps a year after the interview, I went upstairs to examine it, I found no mention of Apparition of the Eternal Church. What Albert played on that particular program in October 1950 was the Ascension Suite. I never asked Albert about this discrepancy. It seemed impolite considering our state of mind at the time of the interview. To call someone out on a memory lapse is a serious breach of stoner etiquette. In later conversations, Albert recalled that a particular passage in the Ascension Suite caused him so much trouble, he took the train to New York for a lesson with Juilliard piano wizard Adele Fingers Marcus. She said, practice playing it backwards. That did the trick. When I was preparing to write this commentary, I phoned the National Cathedral to find out who, if not Albert, had given the first performance there of Apparition of the Eternal Church. They couldn't say. There was no record of Albert's having performed it at all, which, strictly speaking, doesn't mean he wasn't the first person there to have played it. I was disappointed to discover that Albert's story in that clip might be askew from the facts, but not terribly surprised. Albert never let the facts get in the way of what she wanted to say, as one of his closest associates put it once. And I had first-hand experience of his tendency to confabulate when I read on page 147 of his book, Alice Tully, An Intimate Portrait, an account of the time the Testosterone Trio went to play for Miss Tully after her stroke. Albert has the ensemble as a piano-violin duo playing Schumann, when actually it was the trio, we played Brahms. He misidentifies the pianist and has us ask, what do you mean play this for Alice Tully? We hear she is almost dead. A response so marvelously crass I couldn't have thought it up, much less said it spontaneously. Albert has Miss Tully leave us with the sentence, I can't thank you enough for having come to play that glorious music for me. I loved it and am very grateful to you, italics original, which is about 30 syllables more than the old woman was capable of speaking at that phase of her illness. Still, the passage is at least based on a true story, and there's undoubtedly one at the root of Albert's memory of playing Apparition of the Eternal Church in the National Cathedral. When your subject is on a roll, as Albert was through most of his interview, you don't want to interrupt. I do wish I had asked him, if not during the interview, then afterwards, what exactly he meant by having come to terms with her, meaning the church. Albert was steeped in Christian stories, if not theology, and frequently quoted the rabbi from Nazareth to drive home mostly non-religious points. The Juilliard context gave him no shortage of opportunities to cite, many are called and few are chosen. In his late middle age, Albert became a tithing member of Smoky Mary's for a time. Smoky Mary's, by the way, is the Church of St. Mary the Virgin on West 46th Street between 6th and 7th or 7th and Broadway or something like that. It's not a bar, which a lot of people think is what it is when he says that in the film. He became a tithing member of Smoky Mary's, but he gave it up. Close friends said they considered him an atheist, and he never referred to God except as she. But by coming to terms with her, Albert probably had professional as well as spiritual history on his mind. The way Albert told it, his organ career and his employment by the church came to an end when his boss, the rector of the Church of the Ascension and St. Agnes in D.C., cornered him after a service and demanded to know with what oriental and barbaric music he had just profaned the church. The answer was the chorale prelude, O man, now weep for thy great sin, by Bach. The rector told Albert that he was fired, to which Albert replied that he couldn't be fired because he quit. And that's how Albert became, like Elizabeth Povinelli and Michael Warner and others in the cast, a church exile, and gave up the largest and loudest keyboard instrument for one of the smallest and quietest. Messiaen, the church organist, has his own problems with prelates. In applying for the organ job at the Church of the Trinity in Paris, a post he held until his death more than 60 years later, Messiaen wrote this letter to the parish priest. When I was deputizing at the Trinité, I know that I sometimes exhibited tendencies which were too modern, and I regret that now. I was only 20 years old when I deputized for the first time. I am 22 and a half, and at this time of life, one evolves very quickly. For the organ, especially the organ in church, what matters above all is the liturgy. The environment and the instrument are not well suited to modern music, and it is important not to disturb the piety of the faithful by using chords which are too anarchic. The first organ work Messiaen composed after landing the job was Apparition of the Eternal Church. In September 2007, after several years of poor health, Albert died of congestive heart failure at the age of 81. He died at home in the arms of his friend Patrick Rucker, who 3 weeks later would fulfill Albert's wish to have his ashes scattered in the Bishop's Garden of the National Cathedral. With Albert gone, amid the sense of loss, I felt tremendous gratitude for all he'd shared with me over the last 15 years of his life. Lessons taught, opportunities given, friendship, all those nights at the Positive Bar, and all that video, this interview and 15 more tapes that one day, I hope, will become another film. I was also grateful that Albert lived long enough to see the New York premiere screening of this film in St. Bartholomew's Church. I sat next to him during the screening, and rather than watching the film itself, I experienced Albert's response as the main event. Laughter, a wave or gentle swat in my direction, a wry sidelong comment. In the middle of this last interview clip, his jaw dropped and he clutched my arm. In a voicemail message the next day, he said he'd entirely forgotten that he told me the story of Jimmy in the swell box. In fact, Albert lived to be surprised by that clip several times. He'd seen the film on at least 2 or 3 occasions prior to St. Bart's. And the story, while personal, is hardly private. It's on pages 83 and 84 of the Alice book. But memory loss has its virtues, and I think Albert enjoyed being surprised once again by his own candor. As did others. One person remarked after the screening that it was the first time he'd heard the word blowjob in church. And if this film achieves nothing else... Albert concluded his voicemail saying the night of St. Bart's was one of the great nights of his life. Surely, like so much else he expressed in his life and art, a little more than the facts could support, but at least based on a true story. Thank you very much.